Hello, welcome back to another video. Well, today it isn't. Usually, most of my videos are vertical, um, but this one isn't. Um, TikTok doesn't like long form videos. Even just YouTube these days. Why can't I? There we go. There we go. I've got the pen. I really hate this video because, like, not hate this video. I hate doing these videos because even though I've heard my camera record. One time I recorded a video like this and I had to scrap it because I just got really fed up that my phone didn't record. Um, yeah. But anyway, today we'll be working on. Imagine if it doesn't even show. Can you even see that? You should be able. Someone, you should be able to see that. I'll look in post and I'll see that. I'll see that. Nobody will be able to see anything. Come on, you must be able to see that. I haven't got much real estate here, so I have to be careful. So today, um, I know this is really bad. I should really have a whiteboard, but unfortunately, whiteboards are expensive, so I have to go with A3 paper and a pin board. Um, so today I'll be talking about morality, and specifically, a sort of a series I kind of want to do is well, oh, it's what, um, why, and how, and this is what I think. With a lot of philosophical, obviously, there's a lot of things which are really abstract. But what I'm talking about today is the complete opposite. It is very practical. But I think a lot of philosophies you can sort of go, what, why, how, and that is what that is what that is what we'll be talking about today. So first question: what is morality? So morality is essentially the study into what is right and wrong, and we can go even deeper into this. We can go into what's thing called meta ethics. Hopefully, you can see it. My handwriting is really bad. I'm dyslexic and have dysgra- dysgraphite, which essentially it means that my hands have impaired motor coordination with my brain, which means writing is really difficult for me. It has been. I was very, very slow learning how to write. I could spell and read. The writing part, I could even spell. The spelling was terrible. The reading was very good as a kid. Still struggle to write. Anyway, metaethics, which is like what do we even mean is when we say words like good or bad. Um, but what we but what even is morality is essentially what we consider what is good or bad. Um, and when you look at the surface level, the ideas of goodness and badness sort of presupposed as being innate, inherent. So that essentially means that ideas of good and badness you sort of already know. Only when you start and go to meta ethics, you really sort of question what really things like philosophers are sort of suggesting what is good or bad. And when we're looking at the why, we're looking at why be good, why be moral, why shouldn't I, like for example, what we'll get onto, someone like the Greek orator Callices. Why should we not be like Callices in Plato's Gorgias, and argue, and sort of also as well Nietzsche. Why should we not be like Nietzsche? I know it's going diagonal. It's because I can't be. I'm lazy and I want the camera to see. Yeah, dysgraphia. Anyway, why should we not be like Callices or Nietzsche and believe in some form of natural moral order, and that morality is essentially derived from authority. and even speaking of authority, even deeper, if we talk about Michel Foucault, Foucault, we talk about really why do we follow certain moral doctrines and not others, and why do we allow things and not other things. Um, but for Callices, we're talking about natural good. So he sort of believes that because, well, in nature there is a animals kill, eat each other, do unfathomable acts, that because of that, and we well, to a limited knowledge of the Greeks, derive from this reality of natural order, this animalistic order, um, that this is what is inherently good. And so, anyway, hopefully everything isn't too loud. Hopefully I'm not speaking too loudly. I'm gonna go. I'm gonna look at this, and there's gonna be so many peaks in my audio with my lavender mic. I've got a gain at -6. Usually that's pretty good. Anyway, um, I'm going to redo this. Imagine if I have to. I hope that I have to redo this. Oh, I'm so professional. Anyway, so for Nietzsche, he sort of follows on from Callices because, 19th century Enlightenment-esque philosopher. Um, yes, look, read your Socrates, Plato, Aristotle. Anyway, um, and that because of this, one has to define their own morality. The fact that there isn't really some set form of moral structure, as what we call, um, I've got no space, moral idealism. I'm gonna have to idealism, moral idealism. So because there's no perfect what is by inherently logically true as moralism, moral in the world. Because of this, one has to create their own morality, what they believe is themselves. For the all of Nietzsche's philosophy, I feel like can be summarized as pointing inwards into the individual. And for this is why in the 21st century he's very, very popular, because there is a very big bit of in our current society, very, very huge emphasis on individualism. I'm not really a big fan of Nietzsche in a lot of interpretations of him. I think there are some aspects of his philosophy which are great, some really, really good. More of his contemporary I'm more into is Soren Kierkegaard. I much prefer him. He's a lot more interesting, I think. But if we're going into now 20th century French philosophy, Foucault, my pen, Michel Foucault argues that morality, all based on morality, there is no morality. He's sort of a moral nihilist in the sense that what he believes is right or wrong, that there is none. He goes from Nietzsche, there is no inherent idealist right and wrong. And he goes, what I really think into it is sort of beyond this. Why, what, how? He sort of goes as how, like sort of even deeper into the how, and says that, well, he goes, well, all punishment is pointless. All punishment, because there is no moral sort of idealism in which you can sort of punish people from. There is no, to him, there is no God. There is no um, universal moral structure, which would mean that you'd have to punish people. That's why there's a very famous bit where a bunch of French philosophers came together and said that paedophilia is okay. And from their logical structure, there's a reason why they sort of suggest that. And it's not that because they believe that on the same terms as a society that we ascribe, child welfare and child and anti-child exploitation. By the way, as a precursor, I do not I do not believe in any form of sense that paedophilia or anything associated with it is correct. I'm merely suggesting the ideas of Michel Foucault. I do not necessarily agree with them. Um, that Well, because I don't think there is moral idealism, nor do I not think there is really a sense of moral nihilism. that you could go into. Anyway, so Michel Foucault then, um, you shouldn't be there shouldn't be punishment for this. He believes that essentially all prisoners should be let out, and he tells us in a very good book, which I will eventually be doing a philosophy in the dog bed on, which is discipline and punishment, which he sort of lays out this moral like quote unquote framework. Yet, yet. He says, Michel Foucault says, there is no moral framework under sort of which is sort of right. If we're going to summarize it, there is no moral framework is right. And we go into the old, as I like to call the old issue with positivism, which is that under positivism they say that everything is either empirically or analytically true. Well, my pink lights. Well, then we have a big issue because underneath the same pretenses of this same um, argument, positivism is it incorrect. This is an incorrect theory. And so we have the same thing with Michel Foucault. Someone, I forgot his name, a French philosopher, argued, well, then surely your own moral theory, the moral theory, all moral theories are wrong, is in itself wrong, then. And and that's why we quite hard to grasp. But essentially, it's sort of saying that, well, because you're arguing that under this sort of reality that you're arguing in, and you're arguing that all morality is essentially pointless because there is no like idealistic idealistic view. That in itself is an idealistic view because under your pretenses you're suggesting that there is no evidence nor factual universal overreaching moral theory, and yet yourself are making an overreaching universal moral theory. Foucault, when he heard this, goes, "Ah, you damn you, Enlightenment! This is Enlightenment thought, not on 20th century modern French philosophical thought. Damn to this logic!" But, but Foucault, all of philosophy is underlined by logic. We cannot make a good statement out of the world without some form of logical basis, some form of basis, even if it's ever minute. You need that's what you need. Because philosophy is using some form of very, very light bit of logic, or very heavy logic, depending on which way you go. You need to have a lot of creativity, I feel like, with, to create a system to manage the chaos of human existence. And the most grievous of this is morality. And this is what I get into next, because a lot of people experience so much despair throughout their lives on morality. And so now I explain what morality is. Yes, I know. I've only just explained what it is. And I've gone into the why. Gone into the why. I think now, I feel like now I need to, this is the thing. What and the why are very related, I feel like. I feel like they're very related. Lovely Glasgow ambience. So now I'll go into the why. And then I'll go into the how, which I'll go on to about despair and such. But the why, we'll talk about some moral theories, like utilitarianism, um, and intuitionism, um, and then virtue ethics. Yes, virtue ethics. Can't forget that. It'll be a very brief summary. I'll link below. I have a sort of a very very ASMR video on all of them, and I think I've done to death different moral theories. Um, I think the how is a bit more interesting than the why. To be honest with you, I feel like there is a greater discourse in the how, because it's very hard to get sort of. I feel like the best how has been utilitarianism, because utilitarianism is probably the most practiced form of morality in the world. Anyway, I'll change my paper, and to you this would be about 3 seconds. So I've written this the wrong way, the wrong way around, but now we're on the why. So why, like why be? Wait, oh my god, my ears. Why? Why be good? So, so we talk about what. So we've already talked about what is morality, but like, why be moral? Why be moral? What is the um? So for example, Nishitani Kawaji, I think that's how you say his name. I'm terrible with names in English, let alone Japanese. Um, in after the Second World War, wrote a series of books on nihilism, and it's very interesting if we look at it through a historical lens, which I think is very good to look at philosophies and how philosophies developed from the cultural and also time period of that person. But um, for Nishanti Kajawi, his philosophies on despair and nihilism arose essentially from a Japan which had had two nuclear bombs and been firebombed and was essentially destroyed by the combined efforts of the Allies after the Second World War, and also with the moral burdens of being subservient to a genocidal regime. And so, to a lot of problems too, the Japanese population at the time, and also to a lot of the intellectuals, was how could we have let this happen, especially in German. In Germany, you have the Frankfurt School developed from the Second World War, from um, which had a way more of a Marxist influence than Nishanti Kawajori, Kenji. I really can't say his name. The Frankfurt School, essentially, the Frankfurt School is a whole another bag of squirrels, whatever the fucking saying is. Um, my favorite is that the only people that can understand the Frankfurt School are people in the Frankfurt School, or that they're just one of them had a absolutely hated jazz. Just thought jazz was like the pinnacle of like of Western Western like capitalistic degeneracy. And I was like, whenever I like read this, I always just think like red flag, like Nazism. Like, how can you be a Marxist and argue that, knowing that like literally jazz is like one of the most working class, like was one of the jazz, rock and roll, and pop music were one of some of the most working class, like, or not really pop music, not really Elvis Presley. I would understand if you had an argument about Elvis Presley or pop music, but just jazz and rock and roll, some of the most working class like music, and especially jazz, which came from blues, which came from like black enslavement. Really misunderstanding of the historical contexts of the arising of different musics there. But we're not talking about the Frankfurt School. We're talking about the Japanese sort of equivalent. Um, and we're talking about despair here. So I think everyone here that's watching this has just an innate idea of what despair is. For example, I guess as a child, if you've ever broken a window or a vase and you're waiting for the dreaded shouting and kicking the bum that you get from your mum, that is sort of the despair we're talking about here. Just the realization that you've done something really wrong. It's semi like Freudian guilt, but not really such. We're talking about really just that's why the child analogy sort of works, because it's something which you couldn't really have stopped, yet you had the possibility of doing so, yet you really couldn't, maybe through just ideological reasons of the morality in which you sort of operated under, that you didn't really have the idea of knowing. It's sort of, I sort of find it hard to really explain um the sort of what I feel like Hijau has sort of like an innate understanding of what of despair, which is I guess the sort of first issue around the theory. I think is that despair, like what happens if you don't feel despair, like or guilt around moral actions. Um, I think though, um, I'm gonna get into more detail. So from this then, um, we have to sort of argue, well, we've committed something that's morally wrong, okay, and you feel like it's obviously bad about it because you realize what you've done is wrong. Um, and this may be later on through reflection, or a couple of seconds after you've done it. But how do we save ourselves from this? Because this happens all the time. Like in your everyday life, you do stuff like you offend people, you break stuff, you do shit which is like just wrong. And that's not because you're a bad person necessarily. It's just because you're human. And to in and to Shanti, God, this is like sort of the epitome of the human condition. So how do we save ourselves from this then? So there's two ways. There's faith, and there is faith is one, and then another way through this is just straight up basically moral nihilism to some degree. This is with a very big asterisk here, because he wouldn't consider this moral nihilism. He says that has morality still sort of has a purpose. It still has a purpose, but um, it just um, it sort of entails moral nihilism when when you say morality has a purpose. Yet your whole theory surrounds about essentially rejecting the key epitome of morality, which is the despair when you do something wrong. And so, through faith, he believes, this sort of Buddhist. He was a Buddhist. So through faith in the Buddha and forgiveness, you have to you know that you will be forgiven for your moral actions, for stuff that you do which is immoral, and for the sort of this moral nihilistic, this sort of semi, yes, morality is morality is good, but faith is more important sort of idea, and that through accepting that this is the human condition is how it can be saved. I hope you could. I will link below. I will link below the sources, as I should probably start. Well, as I will do. Um, and I really do recommend reading this, because I'm not gonna lie. It took me. I was reading a whole section for about 2 hours to try and understand really what Kajigawa is saying here, because I really like. I don't like this theory. And when I don't like theories, I tend to not be the best explaining them, and instead go into criticizing them. Apart from positivism, because positivism is really weird, and I find it interesting. Um, anyway, um, I hope you can get an understanding of sort of what he's sort of going. I feel like just despair in itself is trying to he's trying to fix despair. He's trying to make you sort of accept your reality and not feel it, and sort of make your life better. And so this is the presuppositions, the sort of I was making, is that, you know, it doesn't matter the moral cost. It doesn't matter the moral cost, as long as you make your individual life better. It's okay. It's okay. So, for example, he still believes that like state police should be involved, and that morality should be enforced. Yet this is such a topsy turvy, just going everywhere theory. It's like putting all of your eggs in one basket, because you're saying we must that moral despair. Firstly, the first undermining line is he's saying that this is a bad thing. This is a bad thing. We need to fix this. And you may need to question yourself. Well, why should we fix this? Why? What makes this at all a bad thing to have? So, like, what makes it? What makes this a bad thing? Like, despair in the moral sense here is is a form of reflection. It builds moral character, surely. Like, as a kid, as I said, knocking over the vase. Maybe now you don't play with football inside. Now you're not playing with your ball, your football inside, because your mum gives you a massive belting for doing it, and you broke a vase that she liked, or a window, and she has to pay loads of money to fix it, or your dad has to fix it, or blah blah blah. You know what I mean? That builds moral character. And so, by cutting out a very important aspect of building moral character, you're essentially telling people that as long as they believe, they can get away with most things. And this is in itself a theological issue, in more so. And Kishigawa says that we should not combine morality and religion, because he believes that is what led to moral atrocities like the Second World War, was to combining religion and morality. Yet that is the half of the boat of religion. Think about Christianity, the Ten Commandments: thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not worship other gods than his holy true Father. You know, thou shalt not steal. These are moral commandments. And this is inherently linked to God. Because if we take a truth, the whole pinpoint of morality for a majority of people pre-humanism, pre-humanistic ideals. And this is interesting. Kishigawa, this I think is the most interesting part of this theory. Kishigawa is sort of combining humanism with theology, making a humanistic theology, because, and this is why I say he's getting all his eggs in one basket. He's trying to get all the good points of these different theories, which are mutually exclusive. They can't, they sort of can't work together, because humanism, yes, you can be religious and humanistic, and that's not a big issue of this theory, to say the least. It's mainly the issue that you're sort of saying that God does not take part in reality, in morality, yet you seek to go to God once you do moral atrocities, as though He is the only one that can forgive you. And so, if He's the only one that can forgive you, He is the only one then who can command what's right and wrong, because He is the judge and jury, final judge and jury. And so, this is my issue with Kishigawa here, is that yes, what you're trying to do at surface level is actually a decent thing, making moral life is atrocious. It takes so much of our time. Yet that necessarily isn't a bad thing. You're trying to optimize something which shouldn't really be optimized. Because when you optimize it, I think that's when you really get the atrocities of the Second World War, trying to optimize morality. And yet, this is what Ishigawa's kind of do. And I can see the historical context. As think about it, Japan, 1945. The amount of guilt, shared guilt, and Germany. Again, the Frankfurt School is sort of the German equivalent of this, but you can understand why this sort of theory would sort of rise up. Yeah, it really doesn't help. It really doesn't help. It just treats morality as a game almost. It takes away the moral seriousness of morality. And so, if we're looking at really what the why, this is sort of one theory which sort of is sort of the impediment of the why. I talked about Foucault earlier, and why is in sort of you don't, is that morality, there is no moral idealism. Um, and I also talks about fallacies as a should only be moral in a natural, orderly sense. We can also talk about utilitarianism, natural moral law, intuitionism, all sorts of different moral theories which would sort of tell us what sort of way, which is what is the way to live, in many different ways, in many different logical structures in which they arrive at these theory. It arrives at different conclusions of what is right and wrong, and for some theories, this may be the same scene, the same sort of moral pretenses, just ever so slightly different. Something becomes immediately from moral to immoral, and that's sort of why Ichigai, you can see why he sort of wants to get rid of despair then, because of how hard it is. But again, because something is hard doesn't mean it's necessarily bad and something should be got rid of. Um, so from the conclusion from this, I think people you should really take from Ichigawa's sort of ideas is that although you can try and get rid of despair, it's not necessarily the thing it doesn't mean you should. Because yes, I don't know, you sent a terrible text message to a really hot girl and she's aired you, or I don't know, said ew or fuck knows what, or hot guy or hot in between, and they've done some, I don't know, they've said shared their opinions in an offensive way to you of how they feel about you. You know, getting rid of that despair, I guess, isn't would be the right thing to do, because you'd probably make the same mistake again. Um, yes. So with the why, this again, if we can go from Nietzsche's point of view and the Übermensch. Maybe you want to create your own morality, which I don't necessarily think is the best thing to do. I think one another argument is intuitionism. Again, not a great argument as well. Really, morality is awful. It is awful. God, the best thing he says is that morality essentially is awful. It's fucking dreadful. It is awful. It is despairful. Yes, doesn't make it bad. And if you want my own moral opinions, I'm quite fond of Fletcher's situation ethics. I'm quite an agapistic or virtue ethics, either one of the two. If we're going with a humanist approach or a religious, I definitely agapeic situation ethics for humanists, definitely virtue ethics. Again, I have videos on those if you'd like, if you're interested. Very ASMR because I'm a bit weird. Anyway, now sort of gone into the how, I think, as well. So I don't think I'll make a I don't think I'll do another clean slate as a. I think I've already explained the how. I'm now trying to think of what else to speak about, but I think I've sort of talked enough in what I wanted to, which was the a sort of why, how, and what is morality, with a sort of a fresh selection of philosophers from a different point of view, especially a more of an Oriental one, because I think a lot of beginner ones tend to focus very heavily on Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, Aquinas. I know when I was doing my A levels, it was those ones. You know, you didn't really hear Foucault or Nietzsche or Kishigawa in regards to. I think they have a very different and I'd certainly think a more interesting approach, because Socrates and Aquinas and Aristotle and Aquinas, for example, seeking morality as a baseline is already a thing which you should do, and they don't sort of go into the authority or the authority structures or what what else? What else you should really believe in, and why you should believe in it. And for me, I feel like that is one of the best aspects of Ku's writing is, why are you, even if something may be seen to be moral to you, who does it benefit? Who does it benefit? My pen, my pen. Um, so for example, my favorite one is I like to talk about is shoplifting. So when you next go shopping, oh, my camera's overheating. I'll have to wrap this up. When you next go shopping at Sainsbury's or Morrison's or Tesco or Walmart or wherever, if you're not stealing, who are you benefiting by not stealing from Walmart, Sainsbury's, or whatever? Yourself, you may say. Well, you get arrested, you don't get prosecuted for shoplifting, but who else are you benefiting? Well, you're benefiting the billionaires, the capitalists, which are taking a large portion of your wealth in profit and using that to do whatever the fuck investment-wise, investments in Israel and genocide, blah blah blah. Or even more like even more greater, like not saying that all murder is wrong. Who does that benefit? Who is more likely to murder someone else, get away with it, and then murder again and again and again and never face punishment? Politicians, politicians, billionaires, capitalists, these kind of people, you know. So that's what I think. Think about the authority structures underlining morality, because most of the time that's where you lead to the people who get away with those who, because that's the greatest, I think, one of the fundamental fallacies in most societies. The people that enforce them, that create the morality, are the ones that don't live under the same moral principles. And that's where I'll lead off of. Look into morality. Look into different moral theory. Morality is a great piece of philosophy. I think is great. And I haven't really talked about another one as well. Another sort of authority structure is around veganism and the meat industry. I think that's another really good avenue to go down as well. Because morality essentially underpins how you should live and what is the best way of living. It's a great thing. I hope you've enjoyed this sort of lecture video. I've enjoyed making it. Okay. Bye bye.